Is meat actually healthy? Or is meat unhealthy? I've done a lot of research in the last couple of days and in the last couple of weeks to find out what science has to say about this topic. You can find all of the studies, all of the websites, all of my references in the video description down below. So without further ado, let's go.
So let us dive into the research. What does the World Health Organization has to say about meat consumption? The World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer announced that consumption of processed meat is carcinogenic to humans and that consumption of red meat is probably carcinogenic to humans. But what does carcinogenic even mean? Carcinogenic, having the potential to cause cancer. Consumption of processed meat was classified as carcinogenic and red meat as probably carcinogenic after the IRAC working group, comprised of 22 scientists from 10 countries, evaluated over 800 studies. Conclusions were primarily based on the evidence for colorectal cancer. Data also showed positive associations between processed meat consumption and stomach cancer, and between red meat consumption and pancreatic and prostate cancer. So what about meat in general? People who once ate vegetarian diets but then started to eat meat at least once a week were reported to have experienced a 146% increase in odds of heart disease, 152% increase in stroke, 166% increase in diabetes, and a 231% increase in odds for weight gain. During the 12 years after the transition from vegetarian to omnivore, meat eating was associated with a 3.6-year decrease in life expectancy. Results published in 2012 from two major Harvard University studies, the Nurse Health Study, which followed the diets of about 120,000 30 to 55-year-old women starting in 1976, and the Health Professionals Follow-up Study, which followed about 50,000 men aged 40 to 75, found that the consumption of both processed and unprocessed meat appeared to be associated with an increased risk of dying from cancer and heart disease, as well as shortened lifespans overall. Meat consumption was associated with increased risk of dying from cancer, dying from heart disease, and dying prematurely in general. Again, this was after controlling for other diet and lifestyle factors. And these results came from the largest study of diet and health, which was co-sponsored by the National Institute of Health and the American Association of Retired Persons. Over a decade, researchers followed about 545,000 men and women aged 50 to 71 and came to the same conclusion as the Harvard researchers. And something to add, Alzheimer's disease risk may also be affected by meat consumption. What about beef in particular? Animal muscle, including beef, naturally contains significant amounts of saturated fats, trans fats, and cholesterol, all of which increase our risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke. Saturated fat may also play an important role in the development of autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis. Beef has been considered richer in fat and cholesterol than other meat, but switching to eating chicken and fish does not lower cholesterol. What about animal protein? Adults require about 0.8 or 0.9 grams of protein per healthy kilogram of body weight per day. Does it matter if that protein is from animals or plants? Apparently yes. The adverse effects associated with long-term, high-protein, high-meat diets may include disorders of bone and calcium balance, increased cancer risk, disorder of the liver, and worsening of coronary artery disease. High animal protein intake may induce hyperfiltration, a dramatic increase in the kidney's workload. Within hours of consuming meat, whether beef, chicken, or fish, our kidneys may rev up into hyperfiltration mode, whereas an equivalent amount of plant protein causes virtually no such stress on the kidneys. Well, what about fish? Today, the top source for mercury is seafood, and among mercury there are other pollutants that can be found in seafood. Today, most DDT, a banned pesticide, comes from meat, particularly fish. The ocean seems to have become essentially humanity's sewer. Everything eventually flows into the sea. The same is true when it comes to dietary exposure to PCBs, another set of banned chemicals. A study of more than 12,000 food and feed samples across 18 countries found that the highest PCB contamination was found in fish and fish oil, followed by eggs, dairy, and then other meats. The lowest contamination was found at the bottom of the food chain, in plants. So what about mercury so bad? Mercury is a neurotoxin that may affect brain function in adults, teens, and infants. A cardiotoxin that may increase the risk of atrial fibrillation and fatal heart attack. The mercury content in fish may help explain links found between fish intake and mental disorders, depression, and suicide. Then there's also the topic of antibiotic resistance. The World Health Organization has to say about antibiotic resistance that it is one of the biggest threats to global health, food security, and development today. I'm going to repeat that. It's one of the biggest threats to global health, food security, and development today. Antibiotic resistance occurs naturally, but misuse of antibiotics in humans and animals is accelerating the process. The overuse and misuse of antibiotics in the meat industry is contributing to the rise of antibiotic resistance in the US and across the world. This serious public health issue is estimated to kill 10 million people a year worldwide by 2050. In the US, antibiotic-resistant infections cause over 2 million illnesses and 23,000 deaths each year, costing society between 55 billion to 70 billion each year in dollars. The majority of antibiotics in the US are given to animals that are not sick. They are mixed into animals' food and water to make them grow bigger or to prevent illnesses in cramped and unhealthy environments. So the problem is essentially that we are giving antibiotics to animals. Then the bacteria form resistance to those antibiotics. And then if people are infected with diseases, with bacteria, these bacteria are already resistant to the antibiotics, so we cannot heal ourselves with our antibiotics, and thus we are at risk of dying from really simple or common diseases that are otherwise could have been prevented or healed with antibiotics. At last, I'm going to talk about zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases, also called zoonoses, are illnesses caused by germs that are passed between animals and people. Put simply, a zoonotic disease is one that originates in animals and can cause disease in humans. Some famous zoonotic diseases include HIV, SARS-CoV-2, the current coronavirus pandemic, the Spanish flu, the Black Death, also called the plague, which was the deadliest pandemic recorded in human history with an estimated death count of 75 million up to 200 million. SARS-CoV-1, a different kind of coronavirus which was spreading in China around 18 years ago. Ebola, Lyme disease, and rabies. And like I said, these are just a tiny portion of all the zoonoses we had in our history and that are currently floating around the earth. So, how do germs spread between animals and people? There's direct contact, indirect contact, vector-borne, waterborne, and foodborne. Each year, 1 in 6 Americans get sick from eating contaminated food. Eating or drinking something unsafe, such as unpasteurized raw milk, undercooked meat or eggs, or raw fruits and vegetables that are contaminated with feces from an infected animal. Contaminated foods can cause illness in people and animals, including pets. So the whole problem here is that by consuming animal products, by increasing the demand for animal products, we also increase the probability for zoonosis to spread, because our factory farms are pretty much the perfect room, condition, or area for viruses to spread.
So let's summarize everything I've mentioned in this video. The consumption of meat increases the risk of heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, obesity, harmful cholesterol, acne, even erectile dysfunction, Alzheimer's disease, and a shorter lifespan. And on top of that, meat is also the driving factor behind antibiotic resistance and zoonotic diseases. So to answer the question, to answer the title of this video, yes, meat is actually unhealthy. And if you want to live a healthier lifestyle, if you want to increase your life expectancy, if you want to reduce the risk for another pandemic, then you might want to consider to stop consuming meat and switch to a plant-based lifestyle. Thank you for watching.